Hello everyone, welcome to the lesson Terraform Level 200. My name is Flavio Pereira and I'm part of the Field Enablement Group at Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This is the safe harbor statement. I'm going to pause for a few seconds so you can read that information. All right. Okay, so on this lesson, we're gonna cover on details topics that we actually didn't talk about on Terraform 100 level course. So it's highly recommended that you watch that first Terraform 100 course first. So if that's your first interaction with Terraform, on that first course, we go over all the way to the installation, set up some scripts, and create some Terraform code along with some variables and things that will give you the basic information in order to start building up your infrastructure. So highly recommended to watch the level 100 if you didn't. As on this course, on the 200 level, we're gonna go over straight to some of the other details on the Terraform that can help with your configuration as well. As you can see here on the objectives, we're gonna talk about Terraform state file. We're gonna cover local and remote state. I'm going to talk a little bit about target resources, how you can target resources when you do plan, when you apply, and especially when you're collaborating among teams. So that's become a relevant command that you want to understand how it works. We're going to talk about Terraform modules, so how you can write modules and reuse those modules to build up your infrastructure. Again, when you work in a team, on a collaborating environment with multiple people managing the infrastructure, so it's easy for them to reuse some of the code that you actually created. We're going to talk about Terraform provisioners, how you can call external scripts using the provisioners, and what the types of provisioners available with Terraform. And the last portion, I'm just going to go over to a configuration of Terraform with instance principal configuration. So I'm going to show how you can use that and take advantage of the identity and access management portion of OCI in order to allow your instance to make calls through the API. All right, so this is just a quick introduction of Terraform for those that just trying to understand a little bit more what Terraform is. But again, I really recommend you watch the 100 level course to get all the basic information there. So what Terraform is written by the team at HashiCorp. So HashiCorp is the company that actually has the binaries of Terraform. So when you install, you can download all Terraform from their website and install on your computer, and then start building your infrastructure from there. So Terraform is knowledge by as an infrastructure as a code tool, right? To actually spin up and create and orchestrate your infrastructure and all the application lifecycle, right? You can use Terraform to create, combine, and manage infrastructure across multiple providers, which means you can work with Terraform on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and you can use it for all the cloud providers as well. So for a single type of configuration, right? Of course, each cloud provider is going to have their own particular writing to call resources and so on, but you can use the same tool to manage all the providers. And Terraform is also integrated with configuration management, right, and provision tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, SaltStack as well. So you can easily integrate Terraform with those tools, right, and then become a really powerful lifecycle management of your infrastructure when using Terraform in combination with those configuration management tools. So Terraform state file store the state of your managed infrastructure from the last time that Terraform was executed. So after you create a resource, and that resource can be a block volume, virtual cloud network, computing instance, right? So any type of resource you create inside of OCI, it's actually saved at the current state of that infrastructure into this file called terraform.tf state file. So this is your base directory for all your infrastructure. When you execute a Terraform again, it's gonna check this file to understand what exactly you're trying to deploy and against like what you have deployed on your infrastructure. So Terraform is always checking this file to compare and see what's the action you're gonna take. If you're gonna create a resource, if you wanna destroy a resource, always gonna check that file in order to make that decision, right? So the state file contains a map of all resources and their data to the resources ID, right? So the OCI ID of those resources, okay? So it's really critical that the state of this file is actually, managed and maintained by groups of people using the Terraform appropriately. So if there is any problems with this file, so Terraform doesn't know what to do, if you have to create a new resource, if you have to destroy another resource, if you lost the Terraform state file, it's hard for the Terraform to understand what exactly was deployed on your infrastructure. So it's really critical to keep that file safe, right? So there's two types of the state file. We call local state file and remote state file, right? So local state file, it's actually this Terraform TF state that actually created on local directory where you executed the Terraform, right? It's stored locally on the local machine in a JSON format. So if you open up the Terraform TF state file, you're gonna see all the JSON format configuration inside of the file, right? So again, because this file needs to exist, it can be a frequent source of merge conflicts when you're working, multiple people working on the infrastructure and creating resources. If you don't share that file with your with your entire team, so people that are actually creating resources, they won't understand what exactly was executed inside of the infrastructure, right? So using local state file again is acceptable for like single users. If you have just one specific individual that actually is going to stand up your infrastructure on your environment, so it's fine if you just have one people, maybe a handful of people working with that, right? So if you start having a large team, where you have network department, where you have the storage department, and each one of them will handle their infrastructure, right? And you need to give the information from one to another one. So it started becoming a little harder to keep track of that file, right? Okay, so just to give an idea, let me just show one quick thing here. So if I go back here on that screen, I have my terminal open, and this is the directory where I have those three files: the environment variable, the provider, and the variable file here. So let's just create a quick resource here. I'm going to create a user.tf file. And I'm gonna create the resource here. Let me just type here. So if I just save the file, and I can see that user TF was actually created here. So it's just a basic user, right? So there's nothing complex here. Just basically create one user that is actually managed by Terraform. So if I do Terraform plan, right, it's going to say, okay, I'm going to create that resource. If I do Terraform apply and say yes, then that user was actually created, right? So you can see here on the screen, the user got created. So as you notice, there is here on my left side, this Terraform state file was created, right? So if I open up that file, and I can see that's the JSON format of that specific user that I just created, right? If I do Terraform show, right, I just go here and clean up the screen just to go to the top and do Terraform show. it actually gonna show that user, right? So the OCI ID of the user 01 that I created, the user OCI ID and all that. So all that information is getting from this Terraform state file, right? So if for some reason I delete that file, I delete Terraform TF state, Terraform doesn't know about that user that I created, and now I have to delete the user manually. I have to go inside of the console or through the API and just delete that user that I created, right? So I won't have the ability to destroy the resource from here, right? But this is just to give an idea. This is actually what looks like when you created every action you executed here on Terraform. When you apply something to your infrastructure, this file will be populated, right? So let me just destroy the resource real quick. So if I do that, and I want to say yes, and go and destroy, then if I just refresh here, now if I go to Terraform state file, you see my resource was gone, right? So I don't have the user 01 here anymore. But as you notice, it created a backup, right? There is a Terraform TF state backup file that was actually created to you with that information. So for some reason you made a mistake, you need to roll back. You can copy things from the backup file and put it on the Terraform state, right? Okay, so this is showing the local Terraform state, right? So now let's go back here to the presentation real quick. So what if you're working in a remote environment, right? So not a remote environment, sorry. If you're working with teams, you have a group of people managing your infrastructure and creating your resources. So it's good if you have if you can share this Terraform TF state file with everyone's that actually using the Terraform to build up the infrastructure. So Terraform remote state file, you can write the state of the data to a remote data store. In this case, we're going to use object storage, and allows your infrastructure to be managed by multiple teams, right? So when you're working on a team, use of a local file makes really complicated, because each user must make sure that they always have the latest state data before they run Terraform, and make sure that nobody else can run this Terraform at the same time. So with remote state, we can write that to that store, to the data store, and then it can be shared between all the members of the team. So how are we going to accomplish that? And here's the code actually to allow you to put in an object storage. Let's do that configuration in our scenario. So if I go back here, I can open up my provider file. I'm just going to enter that information here. I'm going to say, I'm just copy here real quick. So I have the Terraform call here, and I have the backend showing that I'm only use the HTTP backend, and I need to provide address of my object storage file, right? So, and here's how we have to set up. So in order to do that, I have to go to my Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and I'm going to go to object storage, and let's go here on, let's go here on the shared services anyway. So I'm going to create a new bucket here, and now I'm going to call Terraform bucket. So here in a Terraform bucket, I'm just going to create that. It's going to be a standard bucket, and inside of that bucket, I'm going to upload a file, and that file is the name has to be terraform.tf state file. It can be an empty file, right? It can be just a blank file. So let me upload that. Let's see if I have a file here. 200. I'm gonna get this Terraform TF state file. Okay, and I'm gonna upload that file. All right. So Another thing we have to do is giving permission to actually read and write these files. So I have to create a pre-authenticated request to that object, which is the file, to allow read and write operations. So let's just do that. We go here and say create a pre-authenticated request, and I can call Terraform TF state, and that's going to give permissions of read and writes to the object. Let's just extend here real quick the expiration time, and click done, and I can create this pre-authenticated request. Let me just, then what we have to do is copy that pre-authenticated request URL. So I'm going to do that, copy here, and I'm going to go back to my configuration, and we're going to type the address of that pre-authenticated request here. Okay, so as you can see now, I do have my address pointing to the object storage that that I created, right? Pointing to that file. All right. So based on that, what's going to happen is just going to save this provider, and we're going to go back here to the terminal. And what I'm going to do is pretty much I'm going to delete this Terraform state file and just do rm.rf Terraform, and I'm going to delete the Terraform state file. And just to make sure that directory is clear, I'm going to delete all the .terraform folder as well. So it's clean, just the files here, and I'm going to do Terraform init. So I'm going to initialize Terraform. That way, the backend will check the plugins, make sure everything's fine, and as you can see here on the top, is successfully configured the backend to use HTTP, right? Which means it's was able to check and make sure they can connect to that object storage and find that file there. So now, if I do Terraform plan, right? I do have the user 01, and if I do Terraform apply and say yes, that will create that user. So as you notice, I don't have a Terraform state file anymore, right? I don't have anything here. And if I check my directory, so I don't have that file. So actually everything is populated to that object storage now. So if I go back to the console, I can close here and click on download, for example, I can download that file. Let's see, I'm gonna download that on the Terraform 200. I'm gonna load here, so I'm just gonna remove that and say object. Just to give it a name and see where we are. So I go back here. If I check the file, so you can see the user that I create, right? So yeah, if I now deleted the user here, if I do Terraform destroy, it's gonna go back to the object storage and remove that entry from that file, right? Okay, so let's show one example here how actually you can interact if you have multiple people using your infrastructure. Let me just delete that file real quick, and I'm gonna do a Terraform apply again. So I'm just gonna create that user, right? And that's just created on my infrastructure. So now if I go here and let's just split that terminal real quick, and I'm gonna SSH to a specific box here. Let me just get the IP address real quick. So if I go here on instances, and this is the IP address I want to get. Let me get the public IP here real quick. If I go back here and SSH to the server, right? This is another Terraform Terraform instance configured. It configured to use the same provider and everything. So here I do have a directory called Terraform, And if I check the files, I do have the providers as well. So let me just set up the provider to use the object storage as well. So I'm going to edit this file here. And I'm going to enter this configuration. And save. Now, as you notice, it's just brand new, right? So there's no information of the user 01 per se on that local machine. Now, if I do a Terraform show, it's going to say you're going to fail because I need to initialize the Terraform. Let's just do Terraform init. Now it successfully say, okay, I recognize the HTTP as well. So if I type Terraform show, Terraform show, right? So now I can get the information of the user 01 based on the Terraform state file, right? So as you notice, this machine, I never created any user here. I actually applied the infrastructure from my local machine here, right? Another example is, let's say now that I have the shared Terraform state file, I also have a user file here, and that's going to be my user 02, right? I'm going to create a user 02 here. So if I save that and do Terraform plan, just source the variables and do clear here, Terraform plan. And here's what we're going to get. You can see on the plan there's two actions that's going to happen. The first action is actually remove the user 01, right? And the second action is created the user 02. As you collaborating with others and you're working on the group, right? So what happened here is when I created this user file, I didn't have the information from the user 01, right? So the user 01 is only on a Terraform state file. So when I run the plan, what happened is Terraform will compare my user, what exactly I'm trying to do, all my Terraform files. They're going to look and say, oh, this is the user you were trying to create, the user 02. But it seems like you removed the user 01 for your configuration file. So I'm going to go and destroy that resource because you don't have that on your file anymore, right? So Terraform thinks that I just deleted the user 01 from my configuration file, and then that's going to destroy from the infrastructure, right? So if you're working in a team and collaborating with multiple people, it's recommended that you use a GitHub repository to actually put all your Terraform configuration file. I'm saying GitHub, but could be any version control, actually Bitbucket or anything that's actually more private if you want, in order to keep track of all the changes and then collaborate with all your team, so everyone can have access to those files in order to do that, right? This is the best recommended way to do it, using version control. Everyone can have access to all the files, and then you don't have to worry with that problem. But going back to our presentation, just want to show something else that can actually help to resolve that problem, right? So after we set up the Terraform state file, we have what we call Terraform targeting resources, right? So you can actually use the target flag to specify which resource you want to apply. So that's going to give you the ability, for example, in this case, to only apply the user 02 resource that we created, and that will be executed and be created on the infrastructure side. So let's just take a look and see how that works, right? So if I go here, and let's say I'm going to create this user 02, but I don't want to destroy the user 01. I can do a Terraform apply. Let's go back here. I just want to get the dash target and equals, and I'm going to call OCI underscore identity user 02. right? So if I do that, you can see now that the commands say, okay, I'm just going to create that user. And it's not going to destroy the user 01. So I'm just targeting a specific resource on my file, right? And that's not going to change anything else on that particular Terraform script. So let me just say yes. And now it says one resource was added. So if I do Terraform show, now I can see both users, user 01 and user 02. So if I go back to my local machine where I initially created a user 01, now if I do Terraform show, I can also see both users created here, right? So here's another thing you can actually use using target resources. So if you don't have a really complex configuration on Terraform, maybe you're just using a handful, number of people managing our infrastructure, that you can actually work with the target resources. That's one thing that can help as well. So you can have multiple teams working on the same infrastructure, and then sharing the Terraform state file, and then if you don't want to share a specific file with other teams, because maybe for security reason, right? So you don't want to give access to the storage team of the network configuration that was created on using Terraform, right? So you can make sure that they can apply target resources every time they do some sort of change on their own files. So that way, nothing's gonna change. Nothing's gonna change on the infrastructure side. All right, so let's go back here. Now we're going to talk about Terraform modules, right? So module is another way to help on when you're collaborating with other teams to work with Terraform. So up to this point here, right? So we've just been configuring Terraform by editing configurations directly, and as as your infrastructure start growing and having a lot of more complex configurations, right? So if you're just doing configuration directly, they're gonna give you some problems for you. So you're gonna get not organized at all. So you're gonna have files all over the place, multiple files, multiple Terraform files on a single directory. It's gonna be hard to reuse them. If you have, for example, you have to build an infrastructure over and over again, or create some sort of compute instance, or even block volumes over and over again. So you want to reuse that code. You don't want to just rewrite everything from scratch all the time, right? So modules there in Terraform, we call self-contained packages, right? They are actually self-contained packages inside of Terraform, and we can manage them as a group, right? So there's nothing like crazy in order to create a module. It's just pretty much you create a folder, and under that folder you have the set of files that will be part of that module, right? And then, as you can see here on slide, we can call a module. For example, I'm calling a module VCN here, which is going to create just a virtual cloud network, right? And I have some parameters I call inside of the module that I can change later on, or if I create another VCN, I can change some of the variables here as well, right? So let's just give an example here of modules. I just have one quick one here. So I'm just getting out of this server for a second. Okay, so here I do have Terraform modules, and have a folder called modules. And inside of that folder, I have my Bastion configuration and my VCN configuration. So I'm just going to open up here in Sublime real quick. So open directory and Terraform modules. Okay, so I'm just going to open here real quick, and I do have the modules created So if I look my VCN modules, I have a couple configuration files here inside of that. I have the VCN configuration, right? So that's actually how we created the VCN resource. So if you watch the 100 course, you remember we went over to creating a VCN resource. This is the information you need: VCN, internet gateway route, and route rules. Then I have my subnets. Right, I'm going to create my subnets here. And for that subnet, I have my security lists as well. So you can see I kind of break down all the configuration in parts inside of that module. So that's going to help us. It's going to help us use reuse that configuration as well. I have some outputs here on the model. I'm getting information from, for example, the VCN ID, the internet gate route ID, and the Bastion subnets ID. And I have some data source, so I'm getting all the information for the availability domains here as well. Right, so this is actually going to set up my VCN. Right, and then I have another module here for my Bastion or my compute resource. And if I open up the compute resource, this is actually all the resource to set up the compute portion, all the variables associated with that I'm using here, the outputs as well. So I don't have any output here in this case, and data source that I'm actually getting data to, right? So, and then you see I put in the two directories, right? And now if I go here on my main.tf file, this is where I'm going to call the modules. So I'm calling here the VCN module 1. And this is actually the directory. I have to specify the source, where exactly is the directory. I have to look for that information. So for the VCN directory, for the Bastion one, I'm putting the Bastion folder, right? And those all the parameters I'm calling for that specific VCN. So I need to put in a compartment ID, right? I give the VCN a DNS name, a VCN name, the CIDR block of my VCN, the CIDR blocks of subnets as well. I have to give that information. And here, information that I have to use to create my compute resource too, right? I have to specify the SSH keys, the image that I'm using for that specific instance, which availability domain I'm going to place that instance as well, which shape I'm using, and all that. So if I go on the main variable file here, there's a couple of things you can see here. For example, my VCN CIDR block, my subnet CIDR block, the images, right, that I'm using here, the shape of my Bastion. So I'm typing here the shape. You can see I'm calling all that through variables here. Then once you have those modules set up, right, I can go here on the directory and say Terraform init. That gonna initialize the modules. So you can see here it's initializing all the modules and initializing my VCN and my Bastion module that was created here. So then now I can do Terraform plan, right? And now it treats as a regular Terraform configuration. So you can see it's actually understand the module, right? So the VCN creation and the instance creation as well, right? So it's good to reuse that in a way that that if there's another, for example, let's say this network, this VCN in the Bastion, it's common configuration for my infrastructure for all services that I'm going to deploy inside of my infrastructure. So I can just give that module to another team and say, based on that, that's the basic parameter. So maybe what they're going to change is the CIDR block of the VCN or the CIDR block of the subnet, right? But all the configuration, they don't have to touch here anymore, right? So the side of the inside of the VCN, inside of the Bastion, they don't have to change any configuration here. They want to change the variables here on the main directory, just to give like their specific configuration, which is mostly is going to be the VCN CIDR block, the subnet CIDR block, the shape, if they want to change the shape of the compute resource, or if they want to change the image as well, right? So those are the things you can actually change, but the module will give you the ability to reuse that code, so you don't have to rewrite all that configuration over and over again. Okay. So let's talk about Terraform provisioners. So provisioners are only run when a resource is created, right? So they're not a replacement for a configuration management or changing in the software that's already running on the server. So they're just meant to use when you bootstrap, when you created a server, right? And for configuration management, of course, you should use Terraform provision to actually invoke a real configuration management. So for example, you can integrate Terraform with provisioners like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Shell script, right? So as you can see, here's one example. I'm using the provisioner local exec. So to execute a script on my local machine, to actually execute an Ansible command to self-assign these the public the instance that I created to my specific setup on the server for the Ansible configuration, right? So I'm actually calling that through a provisioner called local exec, which is a local execution of that, right? So there's a couple options you can do as a remote. You can do local exec, right? So this is another example here. When I'm creating let's say I'm creating a compute instance, and then after the creation of that, I want to save the private IP of that in a specific file in my local machine where I'm executing the Terraform. Then I have that information saved locally. I can actually execute, I can do a remote exec, where remote exec is you can execute that action inside of the instance that you're provisioning. So in this case right here, we're just adding that information on this file called etc mod d inside of the machine that I just created, right? So this is how we can invoke those provisioners. So let's just give it a quick try here. So let's just go back to my L200 directory. Right, and then I'm gonna close the modules here real quick. So we have a couple of files here. Let me just close those. Okay, so we have the user, we have the provisioner. So let me just create another file here, and I'm gonna call that just save as a VCN.tf file, and I'm gonna create a new file as well, and I'm gonna save as a compute.tf file, right? So just quick create a VCN and a compute here. Just grab one file that I have here as our VCN configuration. Oops. And I'm gonna put here. This is just creating my VCN. Let's just go here on my compute, and let's just grab the compute configuration here. And add it here on this file, right? I'm just gonna save that, save those two files. I've just put some things on the variable here real quick. Get my variables for yeah, my images, availability domains, and all that. So let me just put it over here. Right, I just put in my variables for availability domains, VCN CIDR block, the images, the instance that I want to create, the amount of instance that I want to use using the count variable, instance shape as well. And then at the end of the execution, I want to get the public IP out of that. Right. So yeah, we kind of used that file on the first lesson. So we went over to the details of that. But that's just creating a compute resource. So what I want to show is the provisioner portion right here. Right. So this is actually what I'm going to do. So on the creation of instance, I'm calling to execute a remote exec to put that configuration inside of a file on that VM. So if that's fine, let's just do a Terraform plan. If everything is in place, say, all right, yeah, I'm gonna create that. I'm gonna remove the identity user too. That's fine. So it's going to create my VCNs and my subnets and my instance called Terraform server 1, and we expected that to be executed there. So let me just do Terraform apply and say yes. Now I'm going to go over all the configuration of my environment. And once the instance is provisioned, I can do an SSH and see if I have that information inside of my my file, right? While that's provisioned, let's just go back here real quick. So this is the two examples. Another one is using the new resource, and the new resource is treated as a regular resource. It's not directly attached or associated to a specific instance, right? As you notice, if I go back here, this case, I'm actually putting the provisioner remote exec inside of the resource configuration here, inside of that instance configuration. So you can see I'm closing the bracket here for that resource right away on the top, and the provisioner is inside of that. Using a new resource, it's actually treated as a regular, like just a single resource, and I can call that resource as much as I want. So I can associate that to multiple instances. I can just make the call and reference that new resource to be executed. Instead of new resource, you can do remote exec and local exec as well. But you just one thing you can use and reference inside of your Terraform configuration file. So in this case here, it's using a remote execution as well. It's actually doing an SSH inside of the machine and creating a file. Just say touch. I made a file here, so just creating a file on the home directory using the remote exec, right? So this is one way to do it, right? So remote and local, right? We just spoke about it. All right, so let's go take a look on the configuration that we just started and see what happened, right? So there you go, it's finished. It created the instance, so I can just get the public IP and I can SSH to the instance. And let's just take a look. Yeah, there you go. So we can see this configuration call. This instance was provisioned by Terraform. Exactly the message that I actually entered here. Right, this instance was provisioned by Terraform. It's actually changed on the mod.d file, which gonna give us that information when I log into the machine, right? So this instance was provisioned by Terraform. So it actually was executed. So it's a really basic example here, but you can see you can do a lot of stuff. You can invoke shell script. And again, you can hook up your instance to a configuration management tool as well, using the provisioner. So there is a lot of things you can do using the provisioners to execute remote scripts and even local scripts, right? So if there's things that you need to save locally on the machine where you're executing the Terraform, it's also possible to do. Okay. So All right, so our last portion here is actually the Terraform and instance principal configuration. And we can do that configuration so you can understand how they work. So basically, as you can see here, when I'm using instance principal, I actually don't have to specify my tenancy OCID, my user OCID, fingerprint, and my private key path, right? So those attributes I can eliminate it from my configuration because I'm gonna give the my instance, right, the compute instance that I create where I have Terraform installed on OCI, and I'm gonna give them permission to do the API call and just interact with my infrastructure without the need to authenticate to a private key path or a user. You configured the instance principal. So if I go here, I'm gonna SSH to an instance that I have already up and running on OCI. So here is I have a Terraform directory, right? So this is the same instance I was using before to show the collaboration between two persons using the Terraform state file. So here on the provider, I have the provider set up as I had in my local machine. Let's just change the provider file. And we're gonna use the instance principal here on this in this case. So let me just copy that information from the instance principal real quick. I'm just gonna put it right here. So as you can see, I'm not gonna use all the information here. I'm not gonna use the tenancy, the user, the fingerprint, the private key information. I just need the region, and I need the version as well. So I'm gonna use the version here, so I can get the latest version of OCI provider. So just copy the version here, and now I can take everything out from this block right here. So let's just delete it. Okay, let's just save. And I can just do Terraform FMT, which is format, just to kind of format the file. And you can see here, it's just format in a nice way and put it on the configuration to read in a little bit better way to display here. So now I have that loaded here. So if I source my variables, and if I try to do Terraform plan, it's actually going to try to refresh the user state, but as you can see, it's going to take some time because I actually didn't set up the dynamic group yet in order to allow that instance to be recognizable as a source of authentication without passing the username, the tenancy ID, and all that. So I removed all those parameters, right? So we're just gonna use the instance principal. So let me just interrupt here. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so the operation was canceled. So now in order to do that, I have to go here on the console. So go on the dashboard, I'm gonna go to menu, and well, first I have to get the instance OCID. Let me just copy that information from here. I can copy that, I'm just gonna save here on my notepad. Then I can go here on menu identity dynamic groups. And I'm gonna create a dynamic group called Terraform DG. Same thing here. So I'm going to use the rule builder, and I'm going to see any of the following rules, instance ID, and I'm going to type the instance ID for that and say add rule. Okay. Just get this little message here, unable to parse matching rule, but that's fine. The rule is still going to be applied. So just say create a dynamic group. And now I have this dynamic group created here for my specific instance. So now I can control to the policies. So I can go here on identity policies, and I can go on, I'm going to go on the root directory and create a policy here called Terraform instance principal policy. I'm gonna use that as the description. And the statement here, I'm gonna use something similar. Let me just see here. I do have policy here. Yeah. So let's just copy here. I'm gonna use something like that, like allow dynamic group, and then here is gonna be Terraform DG, right? That's my dynamic group that I created to manage all resources in the tenant. So I'm writing a policy to allow the dynamic group, and that dynamic group, who is part of the dynamic group, is my instance, to manage all resources in a tenant. So, and again, create that policy. Allow dynamic group Terraform. Oh, I missed the 8. Terraform. There you go. Now we have the policy here, right? So now I can go back to my instance, and then if I do Terraform plan, now there is nothing, to change, as I don't have anything here. So if I do Terraform, if I check the users, the Terraform show, see if I have anything. The user 01 is here. The user 02 is here. So if we do Terraform destroy, it's going to just delete the user 02. Yeah, all right, was destroyed. But as you can see now, I can authenticate it. So my provider, if I check the provider again, right, you can see here, I'm just using the instance principal. I'm allowing to specify the region. The region here in this case is Phoenix. I'm still using my remote backend for the Terraform state file as well. But I don't have to use all the configuration here in terms of tenancy OCID, user OCID. So it automatically gives me the access as this instance is part of my dynamic group, right? So this is one configuration you can do as well. If you provision an instance in OCI, and then you can let that instance to be part of the instance principal in order to make authentications and use Terraform and even OCI command line interface as well. Right? Yeah, so this is actually concluded our lesson. So we just went over to the configuration of state files. We talk about locally and remote state file. We use instance principal, right, with Terraform. That's one thing we did. Show an example of target resources and how you can use target resources, especially when collaborating with multiple teams. Talk about a little bit about modules, so you understand how you can use modules and how you can build those in order to facilitate your configuration, and understand how to use Terraform provisioners, so you can use the remote exec, local exec, and even call resource, and understand how you can use that, right? So I hope you like it. Thanks for watching and have a good day.